Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back, Chris. It is now time for the technical portion here. The ball is in your court. I've set up a terminal here with the problem that you sent me. So, yeah, take it away.
Fantastic. All right. So we're going to jump in and make sure that, we're just kind of assessing your ability to solve a problem with a few lines of code here. And so the problem that we have is we want to write a function that's going to take a string as an argument. And that string is going to be kind of a list of words just with spaces in between them. So for example, apple, orange, fox, yellow, apple, banana, potato, potato. It's a fine string. And what we want out of that is we want a map of some kind that is showing what the individual words were and how, well, not just how often they showed up, but actually what the indices were that they showed up. So we see that apple was the first and the fifth, so it's got the 0, 4, et cetera, et cetera. And we can start there.
Yeah, cool. Great. So this problem is interesting. What you mentioned when you were introducing it, right? If it was just return the amount of times it's in there, it seems very straightforward. Adding the index is slightly more complicated. But what makes sense to me is doing trying to write this out while I say it. We'd likely want to split this string and make it into some type of an array. So then I could loop through that array, and I would probably use a hash where I could, I guess an object would make more sense, where I can have an.
Are we doing JavaScript or what are we doing here?
Yes, JavaScript.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Make some type of object where I can list, each item. When I'm looping through, I could check if this exists in the object, or if this doesn't exist in the object, create it, right? And then whatever the index that we're currently at in our loop, attach that as the value, right? With the apple or whatever it would be as our key. If it already exists, then just add an additional value to it, which would be whatever, if we've seen it a second time, right? So apple, we would have 0 already, then we would add 4 to that. That makes sense to me. We'll see if I can code that. I can remember the syntax of how to add that. But does that make sense to you? And let me know if I think
that sounds about right. Yeah, let's give it a whirl.
Okay. Great. So check if item exists in object. If not, create it and add value. Add index as value. If it does, then add index as additional value. And then let's return our object. Cool. I was working in full stack JavaScript for a year, and I just switched back to Rails. So we'll see. This will be fun. All the JavaScript I've written in the last month and a half has been React code, or CoffeeScript, which is even more fun.
I mean, you get to pick the environment of your choice.
Yes. What do we want to call this? String parser equals input string. God, am I gonna forget how to write a function? Okay. Log. We'll just call this right away so I don't forget it. We didn't talk through. Normally, I would talk through what would happen if we have, let's say, an empty string. I'm assuming we just want to return an empty array, or do you want something specific returned? or return an empty object, or do you want something specific?
I think empty object is a reasonable return value.
Okay, great. If empty, great. Okay, so if we want to split our string, we could do that by taking input string, and I believe JavaScript should be split on a space, and we'd probably need to define that. And if that syntax doesn't work, or if you know, I can look that up.
You know, my own JavaScript recollections tell me you've got a good shot here.
Okay, great. So then we'll make our loop, our for loop, where we're going to move through this while index is less than our split string length. We'll increment our index, and then what did I say we're going to do? So check. We should make our empty. What do we want to call this? Our result object. So we want to check if this exists, if this item exists in our result object. So if result, let's see, split string index, which split string index in this case would represent apple. If result doesn't have that, then we want to make result split string index. And this is where my syntax, I think I'm forgetting exactly how to do this, but basically we'd want to make it whatever the index is. I don't know if we do that with a.
I think you just want assignment.
Like this here,
Mm-hmm.
I think. Else, we would want to basically do the same thing, but also add it. So I was kind of thinking plus equals, but we don't.
Maybe that's only going to work in Ruby and Python.
Yeah, it's not going to add it to it. I think it would just add that index to the existing index, right? So we would get the sum of these. Basically, instead of getting 0 and 4, we would get.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
In that case, it would work. If it was, let's say, it was 1 and 4, we get 5 instead. Like, basically, I want to do like dot push would be the like a JavaScript equivalent. I'm not exactly sure if that would work, but
might.
Yeah,
I'm trying to. I've been spending all my coding time in Python lately, so I'm, always got that.
Yeah, I don't think this will work, but it could. If not, I would typically Google, how to add an additional value to a key value pair through a loop. But I think this is worth a shot. Do you see anything that looks like major issues here that I might be missing?
Give it a whirl. Let's see what happens.
Let's see if I can remember how to call a function in JavaScript as well.
Well, you just need to execute the file because you already lines 42 and 43 will.
It does not like the push. Okay, let's see.
Is it append? Concat?
Yeah,
just.
Oh, that might make more sense too. No, that's what I'm already doing.
Well, it's not that you're adding a key value pair. It's that you're. Because I don't think that's actually the intent. Like, what is it that you're actually trying to do through that isn't happening yet?
I guess I'm just trying to add an additional value to the key value
Mm-hmm.
pair.
Well, to the value. The key doesn't really have
Yes.
anything to do with it.
Right. Additional value. Maybe spelling JavaScript would help.
What is the type? So what's the JavaScript type of the value in this index that you're setting up?
An integer.
So the value shouldn't be an integer. Now, I don't think it is an integer.
The index?
Yeah, so so you need to represent multiple position values, right? So like Apple, we need to represent both 0 and 4.
Yes. Oh, I guess it's interesting. I'm trying to think if I know what I would even call that.
Yeah. Well, I realized my notation there is kind of like just agnostic, like technology agnostic notation, right? But I think you want to like think what is your schema for the return value? Like what is the data structure that you want for that return value?
Yeah. So what I just ran this to check to make sure this is actually spitting out what I want it to, which is just a single object. Just coming out. I think if we wanted to do this differently, I could probably make this a string. Maybe not. I think the key value pair thing is confusing me. If it's possible to do like right, we have an index and it's, I don't know, like this is going to get syntactically pretty strange. Like we get a string within that.
What if you used an array of integers as the value?
An array of integers. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. That's what I trying to do the same thing, but with a string here, right? So we've got a string that it's being added to instead. But an array makes a little bit more sense. I don't think we need the weird syntax then either if we do that, right? So what I think we could. So then I think that push would work.
Sure. Yeah. Before you were pushing on a string, which
right.
I don't think is the thing in JavaScript. Yeah.
Oh, is that what it is by default? It would be a string if we're not defining it.
Or sorry, not a string, in integer. I think because you originally just had the index value, which is an int.
Right, which is why the plus equals wouldn't have worked either, because that would have just added those two together, right? So an array of integers does seem to work. And just for our test, if length there we go. So instead of returning what was before a weird result, we actually return an empty object.
Great.
Cool.
How would you, so, at this point then, what would you do to refactor, clean up, now that you've got working, what next steps would you take?
Yeah, from like a production level code perspective, I would probably just make these all clearer variable names, right? Like we could name string parser something better. We could probably name result something better. From a like actual structure of the code, I don't know how I've written a lot of for loops that look like this, but I don't know how clear this actually is. It may be easier to do this with a map or a filter or reduce, or I'm sure there's some JavaScript array method that would be, you could probably do it in one line, right? That'd be really pretty, that I don't necessarily know how to do. But if I was going to put this into production level code, I might look at that, just because this is a little ugly if you're not used to writing this chunk.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I would also probably comment this, right? Because, well, again, this is somewhat familiar to me. I'd probably comment out why we're doing this. So add some comments in here of basically this will add each additional value for this else side, and we're checking to see if this exists or not. Those are the main things that I when I'm trying to refactor, I look at like basically variable names. Do we have any variables we don't need? And then class is like big O or performance, and I don't think we could do this without a loop. So I don't think this performance, I don't think we're going to get anything different, right?
Not without some remarkably different kind of approach where
Sure,
you never actually break up the string. But I think this is reasonable. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say a couple things you might want to think, like there's some repeated code in terms of at least like getting the the word is split string index, right? Which is used 3 times there. So you can certainly put that into a local variable. And then, I was trying to remember in JavaScript, because they've got a few of the different for loops that are available, but I don't remember I think this might be the only one that gives you the index. I think the other ones just iterate through,
I
like
think with
the for
map
in loops and all that.
Yeah, there's some of the like maybe all of them have it now. It's like map, reduce, or filter. One of those I know you can do a map and an index, so it's like a map with an index, or you can do an each loop with an index as well. I just, again, that's syntax. That's somewhere.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Cool. So then, so then I think the next one, oftentimes what I'll ask folks if they didn't incorporate tests, or like I find that when we're doing these kinds of things in an interview, and like when I'm the interviewee, usually I'll try to create something that is akin to a test. Although you usually don't have a test framework unless if you had that like set up ahead of time. Here you use the log, which is like a good first step. I think one thing that I like to do is use a log approach, but rather than just logging the output, actually log output equals and then the desired output, so that you've actually created an assertion, and then your output. I mean, you could output the literal, like what's coming up, but also you're saying like test passed or test didn't pass, right? That sort of thing. Which I find like when people do that sort of thing, I like to see it because they're just thinking about tests, which a lot of people don't. So like seeing that someone's at least thinking about how can I make a programmatic assertion rather than I'm going to look at the output and just decide if it was correct or not kind of assertion is could be a nice thing. Why don't do you want to try just adding a couple lines in order to turn the logging into something that's more assertion based?
Yeah. Do you mean something like this? Like, I don't even know. I get what you're saying, but I'm not even sure how I would do that entirely. So like, I want to console log if this, or like the result of this, or do you just want to call this and then, maybe it's a JavaScript thing. Okay, so that's saying false when I would expect that to be true.
Well, because now we've got, that's the joy of threequels right there, is because they are not the same object; they are different objects.
Yes, because this and the result of this is what I'm trying to test, rather than this thing itself, right?
Yeah. So that's that is actually pretty obnoxious. I forgot about The fact that without having a little bit of test tooling in place that is going to allow you to make, assertions, like more easily make assertions about the likeness of objects.
Yeah.
You know, you can also like, well, I mean, we maybe we'll go on with some of the other follow-up questions, but like I could imagine, having a follow-up question that is, write a function that will that is like an assertion function that would allow you to pass in two objects and then determine whether or not they are they are equivalent to one another or not.
Got
would
it.
be an
Yeah.
interesting kind of like add-on there.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
that would be, the way to actually make that work. And
sure.
that makes sense to me. And seems like could be fairly straightforward. Right.
Cool. So let's see here. Any additional edge cases? So you already identified one, which is what if it's just like a blank string. What are other edge cases that you could consider here?
Sure. Edge cases, if we had, let's say our example is, I don't think this would cause any issues, but we have a ton of apples. I think we're just going to get apple with a bunch of numbers in there, right? We got extra space, which isn't surprising to me. Okay.
Sure, that seems right.
I guess there's a case in which we just don't pass anything in. I think we might cover that currently.
Yeah, I think you'll get
maybe not.
Define doesn't have length.
We could do or something like that, or if input. The other one, I would have to do that first, maybe. The other one that I can think of would be if we had integers. I think that would work. If basically the ones I'm just running through my head is if we just gave it a data type we're not expecting, right? As instead of an input string,
Sure.
we're giving it something else.
Yeah. What about yeah, so certainly like you can imagine just all kinds of garbage getting passed in the function, right? Beyond that, if it was a string value being passed in, what kind of surprising things might be lurking there?
Yeah, I could certainly see for some reason we don't have any spaces, right? So my method right now, which is splitting based off of a space, doesn't work, right? If I was planning for this,
it probably depends on how you look at it, right? Because you could certainly say, well, that's one word. It's
right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it would be an interpretation, right, of if we decide that's the way we want to go and we're just spitting out one, or do we still want to split based off of each character, right? What I actually wouldn't know how to do is, let's say we did this, right? If we wanted to do all the A's as each individual things, right? Like they counted as individual words or something, but then we also wanted to account for other characters. I think that
would be a complicated business rule.
Sure. Yeah.
If that was the case. Yeah.
And then, I mean, again, if we pass in an array or something else, but I think numbers would be fine. It's just going to be, we're going to have a slightly more confusing output, right?
What if we had a string where there might be a variable number of spaces in between words, or that might have space on the front end or the back end?
Sure. Yeah, because I'm only splitting based off of one space, right? So right now we're not accounting for that at all. We could certainly, this split, if we wanted to basically account for any white space, and I know there's some regex we could put in there that'll basically account for any type of white space. I just did something similar to that at work. There's also ways we could, if we just were worried about, trailing or preceding white space, we could cut that off as well. That's probably how I would handle that, because we still are going to want to parse the string in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
And if it was really large, I don't know what else we would do. I mean, apart from, I don't think there's another data structure that makes more sense.
Well, so in this, zooming out a little bit, um, at yeah, and so if we talked about like what would need to change to this kind of like process,
Mhm.
if the data started to become prohibitively large,
Mhm.
from a performance standpoint, how could prohibitively large input eventually cause problems with this?
Yeah, I guess there at some point looping, at least looping everything at once doesn't make sense, right? So then we could batch things where we're doing some amount of the string at a time, which would become difficult because if we're batching, then we also have to make sure we have a global results that we're checking, right? I'm thinking if maybe we're tying this to a database, we'd have to make that call every time because it might not be the local, our local result object might not be able to hold all of the things we have, right, in memory.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah.
I think it was,
So if I was to say that the string that is the input to this now, it lives in a uh, let's say 50 gigabyte sized file.
sure.
And now we have exceeded the ability to load that string into RAM.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'd have to parse some section of that string. What I think would be I don't really know how to do that, but that would be how I would do that, is parse some piece of that string at a time, maybe a certain amount of characters. The interesting piece would be figuring out, okay, how do we figure out, did we parse an entire word or did we just parse, the first half of apple, and now that's becoming its own result in here. So that would be an interesting puzzle to solve. The other piece would be keeping track of an index as it continues to scale. It doesn't seem all that complicated, but there may be, again, difficulties where might make a lot more sense to have some variable outside of this loop that's being updated regularly rather than this index being what we're using to loop through it.
Yep. Yeah, I think that if you really went like, to the, like you have to start thinking about when RAM is the problem and not everything can live in there. It
Yeah.
means actually two things, because it means that the input, you correctly identified that you can't pull the whole input all in at the same time. So you need to, if you were reading from a file, you'd be doing something like reading line by line,
Yep.
or a certain number of bytes or whatever that might be, right? There's different ways of pulling it in incrementally or streaming that data in. The second bit is that eventually your result object could become overwhelmingly large, right? And so, and at that point, then you're talking about doing things like, writing out to some other kind of a data system in order to, using a Redis or something in order to now like set keys and then be appending these numbers on there. There's a lot of different ways then that you could start to like, talk about, take it into like a systems conversation rather than just like the coding conversation.
Yeah.
But it's also, I find that we talked earlier about wanting to create opportunities for awesome, and also like not wanting to whale anybody over the head in an area that they just clearly don't know that much about, right? And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
I try to create questions that could go like in a direction like that. Like, oh, I see this person actually has a lot of ideas about how they would, do scale, and we can have a scaling conversation, versus if not, let's talk about how to, go in here and like reverse the process and do
Yeah.
the opposite, or things like that. So it's always good as an interviewer, if you can give yourself some optionality, you can end up, hopefully, well, saving a stuck
Sure.
interviewee without just having to kind of like, feed them stuff, right? You just kind of create more opportunity for them to show off what they do know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And I like that idea of basically probing to see how deep someone's knowledge is. And if it's very deep, right, let's continue down that path. If not, that's fine, right? We can back off. I think sometimes people get intimidated because they feel like, oh, someone asked me questions until I said, I don't know. Right. And it's like, no, that's kind of the point, right? It's like, see how deep that knowledge is. And it's not like, I can't believe you didn't know, this
Sure.
very specific thing. It's just, okay, now we know, right? Where your expertise are or where they aren't. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
Good.
Great. Well, anything else before we wrap up here?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground here. Hopefully this has been useful to your viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being on. I'm sure people can find you on LinkedIn, and you give us the quick pitch of your team again at Chegg.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chegg, it's ed tech, it's mission oriented, and I'm specifically looking now and probably in the future for smart engineers who want to work specifically with Kotlin microservices or React frontends in order to build student experiences to help people have life-changing experiences through education.
Cool. Great. Well, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the technical interview portion of the Professional Technical Interviewee. If you want to tackle this interview question, you can find it at github.com/professional technical interviewee. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.